Millionaire Gregory Hastings was looking for the perfect person to help his son Theo but had no idea that meeting Emily Brooks would change them both. The clouds hanging low over the city were reflected in the glass facades of the multi-story buildings as if looking into a broken mirror. The damp autumn air permeated the streets, making them gray and endless. Cars with a dull rumble rushed along the pavement, people in expensive coats and suits hurried about their business, not paying attention to the majestic estate towering on the hill. Gregory Hastings' estate. The huge mansion with marble columns and tall windows seemed alive, but inside it reigned an oppressive emptiness. Children's laughter had not sounded here for a long time, doors had not slammed, and ringing voices had not been heard. The spacious halls were drowning in silence, which was even more oppressive than the walls of cold stone. In his second-floor office, Gregory sat at his massive oak desk, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the polished surface. In front of him lay a stack of resumes, his latest attempts to find a nanny for Theo. He had already met with 4 candidates this week, but none had worked out. Not because they were bad. Theo just didn't want to hire anyone. Gregory closed his eyes tiredly. He knew that his son would again refuse to even meet the new nanny. Since the accident that took away his ability to walk, Theo had closed himself off, cut himself off from the world, and every new person was just a stranger to him who would soon leave. He did not believe that anyone would stay for long. There was a quiet knock on the office door. "Mr. Hastings," came the voice of his assistant, Emma. "Miss Brooks is here." Gregory opened his eyes, ran his hand over his face, releasing the tension, and nodded. "Let her in." The door opened and a girl entered the office. She was younger than the previous candidates. Dressed in a simple blue blouse and dark trousers, she looked modest but confident. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and her eyes shone with determination. She did not look around or show nervousness like the others did. Gregory gestured to the chair opposite. "Miss Brooks." "Mr. Hastings," she nodded politely and sat down. He looked at her silently for a while, studying her. "Do you have experience working with children with disabilities?" She didn't look away. "Yes." "Tell me more." Emily paused briefly, choosing her words. "I worked with children with limited mobility. I know how important not only physical support is, but also emotional support. They don't need pity but confidence that they can cope." Gregory narrowed his eyes slightly. "This is a very general answer. Do you have a medical background?" "I studied physiotherapy but didn't finish my studies." "Why?" For a moment, something dark flashed in her eyes, but her voice remained even. "For personal reasons." Gregory didn't like vague answers. He was about to ask the next question, but then there was another knock. The door opened slightly and Emma hesitantly peered inside. "Excuse me, sir, but Theo refuses to come down. He said he doesn't want to meet the new nanny." Gregory clenched his jaw. It was predictable. But before he could say anything, Emily rose from her chair. "If you don't mind, Mr. Hastings, I'll go up to him myself." Gregory looked at her in surprise. "He won't talk to you." "It's not scary," she smiled. "I just want to see him." Gregory hesitated but eventually nodded for Emma to walk her out. The hallways of the mansion were long, with high ceilings and soft carpets that muffled the sound of footsteps. The air was still, as if the house had long since stopped breathing. Emma stopped in front of Theo's room. The door was slightly open. It was dark inside, the curtains were tightly drawn. There was a little boy sitting on the bed, curled up in a ball. "Theo, darling," Emma called softly. "This is Miss Brooks, she's come to meet you." "Go away," came the muffled answer. Emma gave Emily a guilty look, but Emily didn't back down. She stepped carefully into the room, but did not get too close. "Hi, Theo," she said softly. "I'm Emily." Silence. Emily looked around. There were books on the floor next to the bed. She bent down and picked one up. "Treasure Island." "That's a great choice," she said. "I love that book too. I read it to my brother when he was little." Theo didn't answer, but his shoulders tensed slightly. Emily took her time. She carefully placed the book next to her. "I know you're tired of all these babysitters," she continued quietly. "It's not fair that you're forced to meet strangers over and over again." The boy didn't move, but his breathing became a little deeper. "And I know they're all leaving," Emily added even more quietly. This time he reacted. "They always leave," he whispered. Emily slowly knelt down next to the bed, but not too close. "I don't want to be another nanny, Theo." The boy slowly turned his head, looking at her for the first time. There was mistrust mixed with longing in his eyes. "Then who are you?" Emily smiled. "Maybe just a person who wants to get to know you." He looked at her for a long time, then hesitantly stretched out his hand and with a light movement touched her wrist. Emma gasped softly. Gregory stood outside the door in the corridor. He saw how Theo rejected everyone. how he closed himself off, not letting anyone near him. But now, for the first time in a long time, he himself reached out to another person. Gregory didn't know what exactly happened, but for the first time in a long time, he could not find the words. Mornings in the Hastings mansion came without the fuss, the running and laughter that usually occurs in houses where a child lives. Everything was predictable here. Exactly at 7 in the morning, the muffled steps of the housekeeper would rush along the long corridors, followed by the quiet purr of the coffee machine in the spacious kitchen, and somewhere on the second floor, the door to the master of the house would open. Gregory was already up as usual. He didn't like unnecessary conversations in the morning, but today, for the first time in a long time, his thoughts were not on another negotiation or investment. They were on Emily Brooks. Yesterday, she had somehow inexplicably found her way to his son. Theo, who had rejected everyone, who had sat in the dark for hours, had asked Emma for the first time today to leave the door of his room ajar. It was a tiny change, unnoticeable, insignificant. But for Theo, it was a huge step. Gregory stared at the laptop screen for a long moment where Emily's resume was still open. There was nothing outstanding in that experience column. A few years of working with children and unfinished education in physical therapy, no prestigious awards. But she was able to do in a few minutes what no one else had managed to do in a year. Emily showed up in the hall at exactly 9 o'clock as promised. She walked in confidently, although she felt tense inside. The meeting with Theo yesterday had been difficult, but there had been a moment in it that had not left her mind. When the boy touched her wrist. It was so light, so weightless, but there was something more in that touch. Trust? Hope? She didn't know, but she could see that Theo himself didn't understand why he did it. Good morning, Gregory's voice came from behind her. Emily turned and met his cold but curious gaze. Good morning, Mr. Hastings. He studied her as if trying to figure her out. Are you sure you want to stay? Yes. Theo is a difficult child. I know. Gregory nodded and, after thinking for a second, said, I don't interfere with the nanny's work, but if he makes it clear that he doesn't want you there, you'll have to leave. Emily smiled as if she already knew this wouldn't happen. Fine. When she went up to Theo's room, she found him in the same place where he had been sitting yesterday, but this time he was not curled up into a ball. He just looked out the window. Hello, Theo? The boy didn't answer, but he didn't drive her away. Emily looked around the room. Something important caught her eye. His wheelchair was leaning against the wall, covered with a blanket, like something he didn't want to touch. She didn't ask anything. She just sat down quietly on the carpet. Yesterday, I thought you might be tired of being told what to do all the time, she said, laying out a small ball on the floor. Theo glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. So I won't tell you what to do. I'll just leave this ball here. If you ever want, you can push it to me. She stood up and headed for the door as if she hadn't said anything important. I'll come by tomorrow, she added before disappearing through the threshold. Emily spent the whole day thinking about what she would tell him tomorrow. She knew there was no hurry. Theo had withdrawn not only because of the physical trauma but also because of the fear of abandonment. Her own memories made her chest tighten. She remembered holding her brother's hand in the hospital, assuring him that everything would be fine. How the doctors left the room with sad faces, how the house was empty afterwards. How she lost herself. She couldn't let Theo go through this alone. When she returned the next day, the ball was in the same place. And the next one, too. And on the third. But on the fourth, it was moved. Not much. Just a little. But it was enough. Emily didn't say anything. She just smiled. She sat back down on the carpet and gently pushed the ball towards Theo. He looked at her, then at the ball. For several long seconds, nothing happened. And then, a slight movement. The ball returned to her. Emily held her breath. Not because it was just a game. Because Theo made a choice. He chose her. He chose to trust. In the evening, Gregory looked at the camera footage again. He saw his son playing. His reaching for the ball. The first time in months, something like a faint smile appeared on his face. He felt something inside him flutter. But he didn't understand what exactly. The next few days passed quietly, but there was something different in the air. Emily kept coming. She didn't push. She didn't force. She was just there. Sometimes she would sit with a book, reading aloud to him. Sometimes she would bring him drawings that would help him imagine the world outside the room. Theo didn't always answer, but he listened. He no longer turned away when she entered. He no longer closed his eyes, pretending that she was not there. And one day, he asked, Will you come tomorrow? Emily held her breath. It was a question that meant more than just a request. Of course, she answered, smiling. Gregory watched what was happening from afar. It was hard for him to believe that in just a few days this simple woman with no great achievements was able to do what neither doctors nor specialists nor he himself had been able to do. But something in her presence changed everything. Gregory is used to trusting numbers, strategies, forecasts. But here, there was something completely different here. There was something here he didn't understand. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that he had to figure this out. The night at Hastings Manor was always quiet. A silence that did not soothe, but oppressed. There was no comfort in it. It was like an emptiness that even this huge house could not fill. Gregory sat in his office in the semi-darkness, Emily Brooks' resume open on the laptop screen in front of him again. He's watched it dozens of times already. Everything about him looked simple. A normal childhood. A normal school. A few years at university. Unfinished studies. But now he knew that there was more behind these dry facts. He closed the laptop and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. It was all illogical. An ordinary nanny without any outstanding recommendations, without many years of experience working with disabled children, was able to change his son in just a couple of weeks. And he couldn't understand it. Emily was sitting in the garden. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, filling everything around with a soft golden light. The dew had not yet had time to evaporate, and the coolness of the morning pleasantly enveloped the skin. She took a deep breath, trying to get rid of the lump in her throat. It was all terribly familiar. She tried to help someone again. Again, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to cope. I felt that burning responsibility again. Her fingers were shaking. She closed her eyes, remembering her brother's face. If only she had more time then. If only she had known more. If only I could do one thing differently. But now there was only Theo. And she couldn't let him down. When she entered Theo's room, he was already waiting for her. He didn't show it, of course. He sat on the bed, looking out the window, pretending not to notice her arrival. But Emily smiled anyway. "Good morning," she said, walking deeper into the room. He muttered without turning around. She sat down next to him, as always, keeping a small distance between them. "Do you want to try something new today?" Theo finally turned to face her. Interest flashed in his eyes, but his voice remained indifferent. "What?" Emily took a small softball out of her bag and handed it to Theo. "This is a secret mission." "What other task?" She winked. "You know that real superheroes always have to be in shape?" Theo frowned, but Emily caught the corners of his lips twitching slightly. "This is stupid." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But I'll try anyway." She rolled the ball across the floor. "If you want, just push it to me. If you don't want, just sit next to me. Whatever is more comfortable for you." Theo looked at her for a long time, then slowly extended his hand and, almost without touching the ball, moved it a couple of centimeters. Emily smiled. "See? Already the first step." He grimaced. "This is not even a step." "Well, every hero has his own beginning," she replied, rolling the ball towards him again. Theo didn't object. The game continued for a few more minutes, and at some point Emily noticed that he began to move a little more confidently. And most importantly, he forgot about his stroller. Gregory watched them again. He didn't know why he kept doing this. He didn't know why he couldn't just leave everything as it was and get back to his business. But whenever he saw Theo smile, even just slightly, even for a second, he felt something strange. Something that felt like relief. And perhaps hope. "You know what I realized?" Theo said the next day as he and Emily sat on the floor again. "What then?" He frowned slightly. "You don't look like a nanny." She chuckled. "Who do I look like?" Theo shrugged. "I don't know. It's just not a nanny." Emily looked at him carefully. "This is bad?" Theo thought about it. "No. It's just weird." She smiled again. "Maybe I'm just a person who wants to help?" "Maybe," he agreed. And then, without realizing it, he looked at his stroller for the first time in a long time. Gregory couldn't stand it. He called a private detective and gave him an assignment. 2 days later, documents landed on his desk. Emily Brooks, previously a student at a prestigious university. Excellent grades, promising future. And sudden departure. Without explanation. Without attempting to return. But that wasn't the most interesting thing. Gregory ran his finger along the line where her younger brother's name was listed. Now everything has become clear. Now he knew why she was here. That same evening, he approached Emily. She sat in the garden looking at the sky. Gregory didn't go too far. "Why did you drop out of school?" Emily didn't answer right away. She looked ahead for a long time, then closed her eyes. "I didn't quit. But you didn't finish it." She sighed. "Because it didn't make sense anymore." He didn't understand. "Why?" She chuckled softly, but there was no humor in her voice. "Because the person I studied for died." Gregory froze. Brother? Emily nodded. I wanted to help him. I went into this profession for him. I dreamed of finding a way to make his life easier. But one day he just left. She paused. And I couldn't come back. Gregory remained silent. And then he quietly asked, "And with Theo, are you trying to correct your mistake?" She smiled bitterly. "Maybe." He looked at her for a long time. I tried to understand, I tried to figure it out. But all he saw was a woman who carried within her the pain she had lived with for too long. And also the person his son needed. And perhaps to himself. But he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Autumn was slowly giving way to early winter. It was warm in the Hastings estate, but outside the huge windows the wind was tearing the last leaves from the trees, swirling them in a slow, sad dance. Gregory stood by the office window, holding a folder of documents in his hands. He had already read them several times, but each time his thoughts returned to the same question. Why is Emily here? He knew the answer, of course. She tried to save Theo in a way she had once failed to save her brother. But was it only duty? Only guilt? Or something more? Gregory didn't like questions to which he couldn't find a precise answer. And this question began to haunt him more and more often. Theo has changed. Emily saw it in the little things. He no longer sat in the dark all day pretending not to notice her. He began to show initiative, insignificant but important. He started asking questions. About her life, about her childhood, about her brother. Was he like me? He asked one day. Emily thought about it. In a sense, yes. And in some not. She smiled. He was noisy, like a small hurricane. He never sat still, he was always inventing something new. Theo thought about it. I'm not like that. No, you're different, Emily agreed. But that doesn't make you any worse or any better. Just different. He nodded, but a shadow of doubt flickered in his gaze. She understood what he was thinking. You're not broken, Theo, she said quietly. And you don't have to be like anyone else. He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened a little. Gregory watched their conversation. Not on purpose, he's just used to keeping everything under control. But at some point he caught himself thinking that he wasn't watching the footage to make sure Theo was okay. And simply because I wanted to see her. Emily. How she smiled, how she looked at his son, how patiently she waited for Theo to take the next step. And it scared him. Emily saw that Gregory began to appear around them more often. Previously, he kept his distance and did not interfere, but now he increasingly came into Theo's room and listened to them talk. Once he even stayed late. Can I join you? He asked when he saw them putting together a puzzle. Theo looked at him in surprise. Do you want to play? Why not? Gregory sat down next to her, taking one of the pieces. Emily suppressed a smile. Let's see how good you are, Mr. Hastings. I never lose. We'll see about that, she smiled. And the moment Theo laughed for the first time in a long time, Gregory realized he had lost. But not in the game. In something much greater. A week has passed. Emily entered the house as usual, but something was wrong. The atmosphere has changed. The house became cold again. In the hallway she ran into Gregory. We need to talk, he said. She felt everything inside her tense up. Did something happen? He nodded towards the office. Let's go. She went inside and he closed the door. I have made a decision, he began, slowly, as if choosing his words. Emily waited. I hired a physical therapist. Silence. She blinked slowly. What? The best specialist, he continued. He will treat Theo. Emily swallowed. That is? You did your job, he said, and there was no cruelty in his voice, but there was something that hit her hard. Thank you. Her fingers clenched. So, it's time for me to leave? He didn't answer right away, but she saw it in his eyes. Yes, he said finally. Emily exhaled. Understood. She turned and walked out. He didn't stop her. And that was the most painful part. She packed her things quickly. I wrote the resignation letter even faster. But when she entered Theo's room, her heart sank. He looked at her. Are you leaving? She felt her throat tighten. Yes, Theo. Why? She squatted down in front of him and took his small hands in hers. You will be in good hands. He jerked his hands away. That's not an answer. She closed her eyes, holding back tears. Sometimes we have to leave even if we don't want to. He pressed his lips together. He made you, right? Emily didn't know what to say, but Theo already understood everything. He told you that you were no longer needed. She swallowed. I need you, Theo. Always. He bit his lip. Then stay. Her heart was breaking, but she couldn't. I'll be there, she promised. Theo looked away. You're lying. Emily took a deep breath, and then she just hugged him, and he pressed himself against her, trembling. I will not forget you, he whispered. She closed her eyes, feeling the tears flowing. And I love you too, baby. When she left his room, Gregory was standing in the hallway. She met his gaze. His face was impassive, but there was something in his eyes that made her freeze. She didn't say anything, and she left, and he remained standing in the empty corridor, in a house that suddenly became as cold as before. 2 days passed. Gregory couldn't understand why the house had become so empty. Of course, Hastings' mansion had always been cold, filled with the silence he had long since grown accustomed to. But this was a different silence. Heavy, deaf. He tried to convince himself that he had done everything right. Hired the best specialist. Gave Theo everything he needed. The most professional treatment, the most advanced methods, the most experienced doctors. But something was wrong. Theo withdrew again. He didn't resist the therapist, he didn't refuse the sessions, but the sparkle in his eyes was gone. Gregory saw himself mechanically doing the exercises, silently listening to the doctor's instructions, but it was not the same. He moved away again. It was as if everything he and Emily had built over the past months had disappeared. Gregory sat in his office, looking at the reports, but he saw no numbers or lines, just her face. The last look she cast at him in the hallway, as if she expected him to stop her, as if she hoped, but he didn't stop. And now I realized that it was a mistake. Emily was packing her suitcase. She had few things. A few sweaters, a pair of jeans, books. She thought that when she left, she would feel better. But instead, there was a gaping emptiness in his chest. Stupid. She knew it would happen this way. She knew she was attached. To Theo. To Gregory. To this house which suddenly stopped seeming alien. But now it was all over. She closed the suitcase and sat down tiredly on the bed. Theo's voice was still playing in my head. You're lying. No, she didn't lie. She really won't forget him. But it didn't matter. Gregory looked through the camera footage, although he himself did not understand why. On the screen is Theo in his room. He sat by the window, looking out onto the street. And in his hands was a small softball, the very one that started it all. Gregory ran his hand over his face. He couldn't fix it. I couldn't tell Theo that everything would be okay, because there wasn't, and he didn't understand why he couldn't just accept it, as I always did. It should have been better this way, but it didn't get any better. Theo refused dinner. I don't want to, he said briefly and turned back to the window. Gregory did not insist, but then he came up to him and sat down next to him. Are you angry? Theo shrugged. You're not talking to me. What should I say? The boy's voice was quiet. You've already decided everything for me. Gregory felt something inside him tighten painfully. You know, I just want you to have the best. Theo turned his head towards him. You are mistaken. Gregory froze. What? You're wrong, Dad, Theo repeated. Emily was the best. He took a deep breath. But you didn't understand that. Gregory looked at him, and suddenly I realized that Theo was right. When Emily heard a knock on the door, she didn't immediately go to open it. She had no one to wait for. But when she finally opened it, her heart stopped. Gregory. And Theo. Theo pressed himself against his shoulder, hiding his face in the collar of his coat. And Gregory looked at her in a way he never had before. We came for you, he said quietly. Emily couldn't believe it. For what? Theo looked up, his eyes shining with suppressed tears. Please don't leave us. Gregory nodded. I made a mistake. His voice was dull and hoarse. He needs you, Emily. He paused. I need you. She couldn't hold back her tears. But the words stuck in my throat. Theo reached out to her. Please. She pulled him close, hugging him tightly, burying her face in his hair. And then, after a moment, she looked up at Gregory. He stood motionless, but there was something in his eyes that said more than words. And Emily understood. Her place is here. The next day Theo was smiling. He laughed again. And for the first time in a long time he said, I want to try to get up. Emily nodded. Let's do it together. She helped him up. He was shaking, his legs wouldn't obey him. But he took a step. 1 second. and then he collapsed into her arms. "You did it," she whispered. Theo sobbed. "I did it." Gregory looked at them and then came closer. "I'm proud of you," he said. Theo smiled. And for the first time in a long time there was light in his eyes. When Gregory entered the office in the evening, Emily was already waiting for him. "Do you really want me to stay?" she asked. Gregory nodded. "Yes." She looked into his eyes. "Just for Theo?" He stepped closer. "No." She held her breath. Gregory took her hand carefully. "I want you to stay for us." She didn't know what to say, but words were not needed. She simply stepped towards him. And I realized that I had finally found my home. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories.